Hello gang, my name's Sean Denton, and I'm going to give you a quick analysis over Shakespeare's Sonnet 97. So let's go ahead and begin. So what I'm going to do is read the particular sonnet first, and then after that I'm going to go ahead and just quickly paraphrase main sections of the sonnet itself, and then get into some explication for you as well. Okay? So let's go ahead and begin. The reading of Sonnet 97. How like a winter hath my absence been from thee, the pleasure of the fleeting year! What freezings have I felt? What dark days seen? What old December's bareness everywhere! And yet this time removed was summer's time, the teeming autumn, big with rich increase, bearing the wanton burden of the prime, like widowed wombs after their lord's decease. Yet this abundant issue seemed to me but hopes of orphans, and unfathered fruit. For summer and his pleasures wait on thee, and, thou away, the very birds are mute. Or, if they sing, 'tis with so dull a cheer, that leaves look pale, dreading the winter's near. Nice stuff there by our boy William Shakespeare. Now, the sonnet itself, as you know, is broken down in a traditional English form, or in the Shakespearean form, so to speak. A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G, with 4 quatrains and then 1 couplet that can either act as a refutation, so to speak, of everything that was said before, or can enhance the meaning as well. And what we're looking at right now is quatrain 1, rather. And what I find interesting about it is this entire poem or sonnet itself is a bit of an extended metaphor. It's an extended metaphor that really compares the dead of winter, so to speak, to someone's absence. Now, with this particular poem itself, it's kind of interesting, because the poem itself is part of the Fair Youth sonnet, so to speak. But with that said, it does deviate from the initial brashness and joy of his earlier sonnets, and really foreshadows perhaps some of the more melancholy set and maybe deeper contexts of love and romance in his Dark Mistress sonnets. This sonnet, this sonnet along with a few others, almost act as kind of like a transition between the two. And this particular sonnet really focuses on loss, and that loss of friendship or of a loved one while they are away, that isolation that we all feel, so to speak. So let's go ahead here and quickly do a quick paraphrase. So when he's saying that, essentially, like a winter hath my absence been from thee, the pleasure of the fleeting year, what freezings have I felt, what dark days seen, what old December's bareness everywhere. If we paraphrase it and we want to put it to our own words, he's saying, although it's summer, my soul is in the depths of winter because I am away from you. I feel frozen and numb, as if every day is a chilled, melancholy December day. So we could see right off the bat that Shakespeare himself is beginning this particular sonnet itself with almost exasperation. Exasperation that his fair youth that he is talking to, or if you want to say that the speaker of the sonnet is a young gentleman talking to his loved one, or you could say perhaps the speaker of the sonnet could be from a young maiden talking about her loss and isolation from the absence of her loved one. You could look at this from multiple speakers' point of views. But with that said, you can see that Shakespeare brings up loss and equates it to the barren landscape of winter. Okay? So let's go ahead and move on to the paraphrase for quatrain 2. And yet this time removed was summer's time, the teeming autumn, big with rich increase, bearing the wanton burden of the prime like widowed wombs after their lord's decease. So if we paraphrase that, essentially saying, however, when I was removed from you, it was indeed late summer and early autumn. So it's an interesting juxtaposition right there, because the actual seasons themselves, or the actual season itself, is late summer, or perhaps early autumn. You have the bountiful joys that are going to approach soon, meaning the bounty of the harvest. But with that said, he still feels isolated in this particular environment. To him, it is the dead of winter once again. And then he gets into some fertility issues here as well, which is kind of interesting. He says, unfortunately, your departure is like a widow from a lord, who impregnated her before his death and the child's birth. So we get into quatrain 3 right here. And with this particular quatrain, when he says, this abundant issue seemed to me but hope of orphans and unfathered fruits, basically what he's saying here is that this future abundance, though, reinforces my false hope as a fatherless child faces life without a paternity figure. Your absence sends me to dwell in winter, where nature is indeed dormant. And if we wrap up our particular paraphrase with the last rhyming couplet, when he says, or if they sing, 'tis with so dull a cheer that leaves look pale, dreading the winter's near. He's essentially saying if birds do happen to sing, looks like there I have a spelling error. I apologize for that. But it says if birds do happen to sing, it is with a sorrowful song that dreads the incoming of winter. So here we can see that Shakespeare himself is using an extended metaphor that essentially is comparing the loss of a loved one or a loss of a cherished individual again to the dead of winter. Now what's interesting about it is he uses multiple figurative language techniques within the sonnet itself, sound devices, and some thematic choices that we're going to get into right now. I did mention I was just going to strictly paraphrase. Well, good old Mr. Denton began to explicate while he was paraphrasing. I apologize for that. But let's go ahead and get into this right here with the quatrain itself. Okay, the entire poem itself has overall a feel of something that, or someone that is melancholy, someone that is distressed, someone that is isolated. So the tone throughout is fairly consistent, I would argue. Now, with figurative language, he uses the extended metaphor throughout, as I mentioned. Now, what's going to be interesting is he's going to use simile usage throughout to kind of combine with that extended metaphor. From there, he uses multiple caesuras. Now, remember, again, caesuras are strategic pauses at the beginning and or during the middle of your particular verses that allow readers a chance to contemplate what has been said, so to speak. And then he uses alliteration and consonants, which creates this really discordant sound, cacophony, if you will. And what this discordant sound does is it adds to the tone and the meaning of the sonnet itself. When something is not pleasing to the ear, therefore it reinforces the fact that he is not pleased with his current station in life. So with that said, the cacophony, the discordant sounds really give off that tone and that particular mood of someone who is distressed, which almost kind of ties into some of these thematic choices as well, such as isolation, fertility, connection to nature, and humanity. So let's look at, so we got the extended metaphor. Let's look at some simile usage here. We see in the first particular line of this quatrain, how like a winter hath my absence been from thee. Essentially, he is comparing his absence from his loved or cherished individual to winter at that particular point in time. Now, we also see some medial and terminal caesuras in this particular in these lines as well. And honestly, we do see some caesuras towards the beginning of the verses as well. So if you look at it, from thee, the pleasure of the fleeting year. What freezings have I felt? What dark days seen? These caesuras, these exclamation points are only adding to the emphasis of his particular anguish. Okay? Now we get multiple examples of alliteration in this particular example. You have freezings, freezing, felt, dark, days, old, December. Okay? So at that particular point in time, we do get those particular repetitive alliterative aspects. Now, remember, when you do have repeated alliteration towards the middle of a particular word or towards the end, that's called consonant. So he uses alliteration and consonants together. If you look at the last particular line, what old Decembers, bareness everywhere. But throughout, he uses strong consonant usage to create this almost brash and anguished tone that is not pleasing to the ear. So once again, you get that cacophony. And it really ties in with his thematic choices of isolation, because while it is the middle of summer or late summer and the bounty is coming with the harvest, he has nobody to harvest. He can't harvest anybody's love, so to speak. He is alone. He is isolated. Moving on to the second quatrain, Explication. Again, the extended metaphor is throughout this particular sonnet, okay? And again, though, we get some nice medial and terminal caesuras with the teeming autumn, big with rich increase, bearing the wanton burden of the prime, like widowed wombs after the Lord's decease. Okay. Now, what's really interesting in this particular situation is here we get almost like a thematic choice where he's connecting nature with fertility, which is pretty general, but he's also connecting his particular absence also to fertility as well, because once again, he has no one in this particular situation to have his love grow, so to speak. He can't give birth to any new emotions. He can't give birth to any ideas or any interactions with this particular individual. And he's comparing himself with this particular simile, like widowed wombs, nice alliteration right there, and consonants as well, after their Lord's deceased. He's using this particular simile and this like fertility motif almost to really express his anguish and his isolation, because when one is infertile or one has faced death of a loved one, yes, while they do happen to have that particular individual, or rather that individual's son, they, in essence, are alone. They have, yes, the son, but they don't have the particular individual to share their love with, so to speak. So it's really kind of some interesting information right there. We're going to move on to the third quatrain, okay? And here we get some initial caesuras, some medial caesuras as well, after the and, thou, way. The verbs are buried mute. The colon usage also, great caesuras, because there you pause. And Shakespeare really wants you to contemplate this hopelessness that he is feeling, this particular unfathered fruit. Just like in winter, when nature pauses and it is silent, he also wants you to pause and reflect and contemplate the silence and the barrenness of his own state of emotional distress. So once again, we get some alliteration and we get some consonants, but we can also see once again throughout this particular sonnet a major connection of nature and humanity. While, yes, nature is a cycle of birth, death, rebirth, at this particular point in time, it's an interesting paradox, because while we are in the middle of that life cycle, so to speak, and death of the seasons will be approaching down the line, he's in that particular death internally within his own soul. So his seasonal soul, so to speak, is out of whack. He essentially is in a dead of winter while life is about him. So we see that connection of nature and humanity in splendid details here. And I really love these last lines. We're leading up to the volta and the couplet, and thou way, the very birds are mute. He strategically, I believe, puts that colon there. Mute. Silence. You pause. You hear that silence, and you're waiting for the next couplet, in which he says the following. Or, if they sing, 'tis with so dull a cheer that leaves look pale, dreading the winter's near. We get some awesome personification right there. That even nature itself, the leaves, are dreading the winter's near at this particular point in time. Even if nature does have some life in winter, it's going to be so dull because his loved one, his companion, is gone, that they will dread everything that is in front of them. So, with that said, I believe that is it for my explication. It's a quick one. This program will only give me 15 minutes. So I hit some of the main points that I felt. If you guys want to discuss and maybe ask Dr. Scott some questions and I can respond to you and she can relay them back to me, I'd be more than happy to do that also. To be honest with you, I totally and completely just hit this presentation all at once in 15 minutes. So hopefully it made some sense to you. I was kind of free-flowing right there. So if you do happen to have any questions, please let Dr. Scott know. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about the sonnet, because that's what's great about poetry, our own internal interpretations based off of what the particular author gives us. And that's the great thing about it. I love it. So I think that's it. It's nice, quote-unquote, meeting all of you. And I hope you have I hope you have a great spring break.